we will do just a brief overview. We're going to do a brief overview of Hebrews 11. So we can turn to Hebrews 11. And we will be leaving there at some point, so mark it if you want. And we are going to read Hebrews 11. We're in church, so reading the Bible is a good thing to do in church and a good thing to do together. So we're going to go through Hebrews 11 real quick. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good report. Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. By faith Enoch was translated, that he should not see death, and was not found, because God had translated him. For before his translation he had this testimony, that he pleased God. But without faith it is impossible to please him, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. By faith Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world, and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore sprang there even of one, and him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is, in heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was a-dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph, and worshipped leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel, and gave commandment concerning his bones. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea, as by dry land, which the Egyptians essaying to do were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down, after they were compassed about 7 days. By faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. And what shall I say more? What shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, and of Barak, and of Samson, and of Jephthah, of David also, and Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. Of whom the world was not worthy, they wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. So I don't believe there's a chapter in the New Testament, or I don't believe there's a chapter just in the Bible overall that provides a more clear New Testament explanation for the entire Old Testament. It gives us sort of a redefining of what we see in the Old Testament, as explaining all the action that we see in the Old Testament as acts of faith. It has been said that the New Testament is infolded in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is unfolded in the New Testament. And that's essentially what we see here, because as we read through the Old Testament, we don't really get what Paul sees here. You won't see it. But Paul explains that as what the as what was done in the Old Testament was indeed done for us. If we turn to 1 Corinthians 10, 1 Corinthians 10. 10:11, verse 11. Now all these things, 1 Corinthians 10:11, now all these things happened unto them for in samples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So that is written for us and for our time. What they suffered, what they did throughout the Old Testament is indeed truly for us and applicable for us in our time. So again, as good, probably on the cusp of being Laodicean Christians, we often try to worm our way out of things by saying that was then, this is now. And if we talk to anybody, you go to any church you'll find most large religious organizations even taking that same idea. That was then, this is now, it's different now. And God says, no, it's not. And God says, I've taken the lessons of the ancient, and I'm still, I wrote that for you and left that for you in your time. So it is applicable. And if we turn to Romans 15, Romans 15. Romans 15 and verse 4, for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, and that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. Now hope is very much an aspect. It has a relation to faith. It is, of course, distinctly different, but faith is the substance of things hoped for, as we saw in Romans 11:1, Hebrews 11:1. So two notes again on that, of course, is that it was written for us. The Old Testament was indeed written for us and for our learning. Where was I? Sorry, I dropped that page and I didn't want to. For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. And again, that patience and comfort of the Scriptures is going to come through reading. It's not the presence of the book. You're not going to be able to... There's a lot of Christians, and there's a lot of unsaved people who are trying to derive some benefit from having a Bible just in proximation, right? It's over there on the shelf. I have a Bible. How many times do you knock on somebody's door, or do you go to witness to somebody, and I have a Bible, and then you find out that the Bible is in the house, and it's along with there's a statue of Mary, and we got a little baby Buddha somewhere or whatever, a little tiny Buddha statue. And it's usually what you find is people are, I kind of got a smattering of all of it, because, once I blow the dust off the Bible and I read something out of Psalms and I go rub the rabbit's foot. But that's what we do. We make our own religions, and you can't derive any patience or any comfort from these scriptures without actually reading them. So again, we need to read them. We need to pay attention to what they have to say. Now, the main topic of Hebrews 11 is faith. I would hope that reading through it, you picked up on that faith was mentioned a lot. And there's no chapter in which I don't believe where faith is mentioned any more than in Hebrews 11. And faith is by and large a New Testament concept. In looking for the, again, what is faith, right, as we discuss it. So I would find that this is probably the most succinct and simple explanation for faith. Faith is an affectionate, practical confidence in the testimony of God. I think you can stretch it to go deeper, and if you look at the various definitions, some guys can turn that into a 2-page explanation, and we can take faith many different ways, but in the end, it's an affectionate, practical confidence in the testimony of God. It is, like I said, a New Testament concept. It was present in the Old Testament as far as the word faithful and faithfulness was used many times to describe the Lord. But faith as the word that we see so very much in the New Testament was only used twice in the Old Testament. Faith by itself was only used twice in the Old Testament. So we'll turn to Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy 32, verse 18. This is coming from Moses', it's the Song of Moses. It's his words of departure, describing his adventures with Israel and the ups and downs, and before he is to be relinquished of his duties, and pass it off to Joshua. Verse 18, of the rock that begat thee, thou art unmindful, and hast forgotten God that formed thee. And when the Lord saw it, he abhorred them because of the provoking of his sons and of his daughters. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end shall be. For they are a very froward generation, children in whom is no faith. So that is one time that faith is used, and we can compare that, right, to Hebrews 11:6, right? Turn to Hebrews 11:6. But without faith, it is impossible to please God. So here the Lord is describing his disgust with the children of Israel, and again, as a descriptor of that, they are children in whom there is no faith, and again, we find in Hebrews 11:6 again that without faith, you're simply not going to please the Lord. You can't. You really can't. We'll see faith gets mentioned again in Habakkuk 2:4. So this is the only two times that faith by itself is mentioned in the Old Testament. Habakkuk 2:4. Behold, his soul, which is lifted up, is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. And we see that similar tone in Romans 1:17. This same Romans 1:17. Turn there. Romans 1:17, for therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Now, and then we see that same, the just shall live by faith, is again repeated in Galatians 3:11 and Hebrews 10:38. So two basic concepts about faith are established in the New Testament, or the Old Testament, and reconfirmed in the New Testament. And that is one, that you're simply not going to please the Lord without faith, and you are simply not, and that the just shall live by faith. So two things, very, very clearly stated. Without faith, you're not going to please the Lord, but the just shall live by faith. And that is one of the things we do get, we'll talk about in a few minutes. So what we find, again through Hebrews 11, is that the works of the Old Testament were indeed with acts of faith. We associate the Old Testament a lot of times with the Old Testament Jewish religion that the Lord had set in place. Sacrifices and the observance of days and making sure that again, we read the law, right? Everything, diverse measures, and don't do this and don't do that, and make sure that you give so much. The Lord had set up a system in which they were supposed to abide by, and it was very much a system of works with physical blessing. Right? That was what the Lord had always promised, that if Israel obeyed what he had said, he would bless them physically. They would see those blessings on earth. That's what made Job, right? That's what made Job so hard for people to understand, because testing was not something that they were familiar with, that if the Lord had cursed your crops, you were clearly doing something wrong. That's what he promised. That's what he had promised Israel. If you do right, I will bless you. So again, so we associate that with a system of works, but indeed they were acts of faith, as Paul so concisely explains. But also, as New Testament Christians, we often just do nothing because we have grace, and we're saved, and we're eternally secure. It's a blessing. I would much rather have it the way we have it, and I've done this too, where I look back at the Old Testament and again without a clear look, just in the vanity or just the lazy Christian mentality, you go, wow, they really had it made. The Lord really blessed them when they did right and all that kind of stuff. I would much rather have the grace we have now, but there is no denying that grace breeds a level of laziness. So if you turn to, throughout Hebrews 11, we see acts. And Hebrews 11 ties those together as acts of faith. We see that the elders obtained. We see by what they did, by faith we understand. We see that Abel offered, Enoch pleased, Noah moved with fear, prepared. Abraham obeyed, he went, he sojourned, he was tried, he offered up Isaac. Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. Jacob blessed his descendants. Joseph mentioned and commanded, left commands concerning his bones. So all these things that we take as just simple actions were indeed acts of faith. Joseph leaving commands for the children of Israel that they were going to be leaving Egypt, set that up because he knew that wasn't their home, right? They had a promised land. They weren't supposed to stay in Egypt. He didn't know how that was going to work, but he knew that when you guys leave here, because this is not your home, I left instructions for you. Moses' mother, by faith, hid him for 3 months. And Moses, by faith, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and he chose the reproach of the Israelites. And in fact, it says he chose the reproach of Christ. And then we see, go back to Hebrews 11. And we see more action. We see more actions in in verse 33, starting there. It says, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trials of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and tormented. Again, these were acts of faith, and acts of faith that we are indeed lacking. But so turn to James. Turn to the book of James to reinforce that point. Just right after Hebrews. James 2. James 2:17. Even so, faith, if it hath not works, is dead. Again, there would be no roll call of faith if these people that we see in Hebrews 11 didn't do anything. Noah would have been dead if he had taken the modern Christian mentality to say, somebody's got to build this ark. I don't know who's going to build the ark, but I've never built a boat before. That's what you're up against today. And we do this ourselves. You got to go witness. I'm not a really good witness. I'm not a really good preacher. And yet you poor folks are listening to me. So God's going to use whoever he's got to use if you're willing. I mean, that was Moses' whole take on it, right? I'm not really up to par here. I'm not really going to be able to lead these people. You talk about a second act. That guy at 80 years old takes on leading the children of Israel, and as far as we know, is responsible for writing 5 books of the Bible. Lord's going to use whoever's willing. You say okay, and I'm just going to figure out a way. You'll figure out a way. I remember we had I wish none of you probably ever met Brother Tommy Tillman, and we've supported him for years. He had a work in. His son, Mitch Tillman, runs the missions in Mongolia and still in Thailand. And Brother Tommy Tillman had to work with the lepers. He had orphanages set up and leper villages set up. And the Lord blessed him and used him mightily. And you want to talk about the most unbecoming person? This guy showed up, and I think he was from Georgia. But he had just that heavy Georgia accent. He was about 6 inches shorter than me, with a whole bunch of, just a little roly-poly southerner that you're like, this is the guy? This is the guy? And it was a blessing. That guy was just driven. And for years, I remember reading, he would go down during the 70s and 80s, he would be trying to witness, I think it was down by the docks of wherever he was, and because Russian boats would come in. And this was during the Cold War. So we still had trade, apparently, with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And the FBI actually caught him because, again, espionage was a big thing. And when the Russians were using their ships, just like we were using ours, so he actually had the FBI pull him aside and say, you need to stop witnessing to all these Russian sailors and get out of here. So Brother Tillman instead he found out which bridge that these ships were going underneath, and he would time himself and drive by, get out of his car, and throw a bag of tracts and Bibles down on them. So again, wherever the Lord's going to use whoever's willing, and he's with the Lord now. I think he. Every time he'd write us, when he had another birthday, he'd always just say that he was looking for another 10 years. He just kept praying for another 10 years. I think the Lord let him go for 80 plus years. He had, I think, like 10 or 15 stints in his heart and all that kind of stuff. But again, the Lord will use whoever's willing. So again, back to James 17, even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Again, Brother Tommy Tillman could have had great faith, but it's dead without works. Yea, a man may say, thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. Again, we don't want to fall into the trap of I must do in order to be blessed. Or God will be displeased, but at the same time, we don't want to do what we do already as saved modern-day Christians, and that's just sit back and try to rest on our faith. Where does that fall apart? It falls apart in the challenges of life. It falls apart every time you're faced with a decision because your faith is weak. It's not put in practice because you're not using it. You're not trying. And it's hard not to do a brief overview of this chapter without being stuck kind of on less of a study and just more of a little bit of a message on this part. And that's what kills us as Christians every time. Because we've not pushed, we've not tried the Lord, we've not acted on our faith, and when we are challenged, and the most basic challenges, I see Christians all the time. We fall apart. We fall out of church. We sit there and wonder where the Lord is because, again, we're associating being saved with material blessing, with ease and comfort, and God again doesn't leave that as He never promised us that. You know, again, you'll see people that fall out of church because their family didn't turn out perfectly because their kids didn't turn out the way they thought they should, and they'll sit back and go, well, that was a waste. That wasn't the purpose. It wasn't the purpose, and the Lord didn't promise all that. That's a lot of times we're taking God for salvation, and then we are creating that. We're taking that old Jewish religion and saying, well, I'm saved, so the Lord's going to give me everything I need, and I'm never going to lose my job, and I'm never going to have to really sweat the budget, and I'm never really going to have to figure out how I'm going to give to church and do what I need to do, or give to the Lord and do what I need to do. I'm never really going to have to struggle to get to church or struggle to raise my kids. It's just going to be easy and all that fun stuff, and the reality is it's not. It's far from that. So, again... Yea, a man may say, thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. Verse 19, chapter 2, James, thou believest that there is one God. Thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble. All right, so they have a firm belief. They've seen God. They believe it. They believe everything that's in this book, but they're not changing their ways. So who do we have more in common with? Again, our church attendance, not an act of faith. If that's the greatest extent of our exercise of faith, then we really need to step it up. It's weak. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? Seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect? What would have happened if Abraham just said no? Lord, I'll do anything you want. Man, I've been willing to sojourn. I've been willing to leave my idols, to leave Babylon, to get out of there and start running around and do that. I believe also if you look at, when we look at Hebrews 11, and it talked about that the children of Abraham were indeed, are innumerable, I would associate that we are indeed in that group, because his acts of faith is what the Lord used many times to again, there's a procession, right? So for us to be where we are at, Abraham was a piece of that puzzle, and he indeed obeyed. Seest thou faith wrought with works? By works was faith made perfect. Again, that's a question. Don't you see how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect? And the scripture was fulfilled with such: Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. Ye see then how that by works a man is justified, and not by faith only. Likewise also was not Rahab the harlot justified by works, when she had received the messengers and had sent them out another way. For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. All right, so if we're here, if we want to see people saved, that's good. Are you witnessing? Are you pushing to witness? In your home, what are you doing to present Christ to your children, to your family? Again, I believe we'd all love to see them saved, but there's a level of work that we need to put in. So very much faith is rooted in action. Without it, it's dead. That's why, again, we get saved and then we wither, because you need to grow, you need to move forward, you need to progress. And from that end of the lesson, I would hope that you we strive harder. Byproducts of faith. Let's turn to Romans 5:2. Romans 5:2. We get access to grace, by whom also we have access by faith into this grace, wherein we stand and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. So we get access to faith. We get access to grace through faith. Galatians 3:26. You can turn there. If you start looking at things honestly, we can start seeing that a lot of times our attitudes, right, our take on certain decisions and situations in life, maybe dealing with a brother, right? That's talking about access to grace before God. But how about just being gracious to somebody else? It's harder to do, right? We can certainly enjoy having grace with the Lord, but again, putting that faith into and backing it up with some works, right? Being gracious with somebody else, being gracious with somebody that you've decided has offended you. Galatians 3:26, we get a new birth. For ye are all the children of God by faith in Christ Jesus. So again, not going to get saved without faith. But it's a baby step thing. The Lord's very methodical, right? He chose Israel. Didn't give them much opportunity. He just said, I'm picking you guys. He went and knocked on Abraham's door, and Abraham said yes. And very much is the same case for all of us. The Lord knocks on your heart, and you're either going to say yes or no. You may get some second chances or multiple chances, and you're going to get saved. And then after that, it's how much do you want to put into it? Again, if Abraham said no, he wouldn't be such a foundational character of Scripture that we see. And for us, it's the same thing. How much Christianity, how much How much joy in the Lord? How much peace do you want to have? All these things. How much of the fruits of the Spirit do you actually want to have present in your life? Well, that's going to be the exercise of your faith. Start working. Start doing things that push you. And it's going to be a challenge. It will be work. It's action, right? Faith is rooted in works. It's rooted in labor. And again, like we've talked about in our Bible study there, God follows that specific pattern, right? Life is, you can even take that all the way back to Adam, right? By the sweat of your brow, you're going to have to labor. Turn to Romans 3:25. Romans 3:25. Another byproduct of faith. Whom God, this is talking about Christ Jesus, whom God hath set forth to be a propitiation through faith in his blood, to declare his righteousness for the remission of sins that are past through the forbearance of God. So the propitiation is an atonement or atoning sacrifice offered to God to assuage his wrath and render him propitious to sinners. So the Lord, through faith, we get atonement. We get the Lord's mercy because his wrath towards us is assuaged. Turn to Romans, just a little further down, 3:28. Romans 3:28. We get justification. Therefore we conclude that man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. So again, the law doesn't justify you. Faith is what gives us justification. And it talks about that. I think again in Hebrews 11. I'm sorry, I meant to pursue that one a little further. Turn to Acts 26:18. Acts 26:18. So. Acts 26:18, we get sanctification. To open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. So we get sanctification through faith. Turn to Romans 4, back to Romans. Romans 4, verse 11, and again, this is talking about this is Abraham, and he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of faith, which he had yet being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe, though they be not circumcised, that righteousness might be imputed unto them also. And that the father of circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision only, but who also walk in the steps of that faith of our father Abraham, which he had being yet uncircumcised. For the promise that he should be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. So again, Abraham's status as being the leader of a great nation wasn't given to him because God just said, I'm going to make you that. It was, I'm going to make you that. But Abraham had to act on what the Lord had revealed to him. Again, as Christians today, we need to act on what the Lord has revealed to him. We believe there's an end coming, right? We believe in a hell, and we need to be telling other people. We need to let that stuff affect our lives. We believe in a judgment seat of Christ. We need to believe. If we believe in that judgment, then what are we doing in our own lives and for the lives of others? Turn to Romans 16:26. Romans 16:26. But now is made manifest, and by the scriptures of the prophets, according to the commandment of the everlasting God, made known to all nations for the obedience of faith. You get obedience. You're not going to obey without faith. But again, faith without works is dead. Going to obey? Great. Do something. We get joy. Philippians 1:25. Philippians 1:25. And having this confidence, I know that I shall abide and continue with you all for your furtherance and joy of faith. Again, feeling weak in the Lord, feeling a little weak. And again, we should be joyous, right? We really should be. But it's hard to be joyous when we spend every day of our lives just trying to please ourselves and do whatever it is that we think we need, but all the while our Father in heaven is just being neglected. Again, 1 John 5:4. Let's turn there. Trying to hurry up and finish so we have a few minutes. 1 John 5:4. For whatsoever is born of God overcometh the world, and this is the victory that overcometh the world, even our faith. Again, faith is going to help you overcome yourself. and so we need to, again, we get overcoming through faith. Again, it's tough, right? It's tough coming into church, tough demonstrating some joy in the Lord when we've lived our entire week in defeat because we've not exercised faith. And then finally, in James 5, turn to James 5. James 5 and verse 15, and the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up. And if he have committed sins, they shall be forgiven him. We get answered prayer through faith. So, again, how do you want to exercise your faith? Prayer is a good way to do it too. Again, a lot of this stuff is born out of action, right? So faith without works is dead. That's kind of just a brief overview of what we see in Hebrews 11. We see that the over, kind of the final, there's a lot more there. There's a lot more there, but just a brief overview. The end that I could give us in 40 minutes was faith without works is dead. And for us as modern day Christians, we truly, truly need to step up our works game. It's weak, right? It's weak.